Good morning, guys. Mrs. George here. I'm today on chapter 6. So I'm just going to write chapter 6 at the top. Chapter 6. An icy wind was blowing violently, but we marched out without faltering. The SS made us increase our pace. And faster, you tramps, you flea-ridden dogs. Why not moving fast made us a little warmer? The blood flowed more readily in our veins. We had the feeling of being alive. Faster, you filthy dogs. Again, all these are themes of persecution, inhumanity, or brutality. You can use all that. Persecution, you can use all those words. Persecution, inhumanity, or you could even say brutality. Brutality. So these are the three themes that you could actually see there. We were no longer marching, we were running like automatons. Again, we have got simile there. The SS were running as well, weapons in hand. We looked as though we were running from them. The night was pitch black. From time to time, a shot exploded in the darkness. They had orders to shoot anyone who could not sustain the pace. They had orders to shoot anyone, their fingers on the triggers. They did not deprive themselves of the pleasure. If one of us stopped for a second, a quick shot eliminated the filthy dog. So here we could see dehumanization, or we could see comparing humans to animals. So a kind of animal imagery or dehumanization. So comparing them to just like eliminating filthy dogs, comparing them to animals. I was putting one feet in front of the other like a machine, So again, simile there. Another simile. Simile. Oh, I'm skipping a little bit. I kept repeating to myself, don't think, don't stop, run. Near me, men were collapsing into the dirty snow, gunshots. A young boy from Poland was actually marching beside me. His name was Salman. Maybe you have to know the name of that boy. He had worked in the electrical material depot in Buna. People mocked him because he was forever praying or meditating on some Talmudic question. For him, it was an escape from reality, from feeling the blows. So he was a very faithful person. All of a sudden, he had terrible stomach cramps. So he had terrible stomach cramps. My stomach aches, he whispered to me. He couldn't go on. He had to stop a moment. I begged him, wait a little, Salman. Soon we'll come to a halt. We cannot run like this to the end of the world. So we could see the theme of hope. He's trying to give hope and encouragement to that little boy from Poland, whose name is Salman. So he's trying to give hope. But while running, he began to undo his buttons and yelled to me, I can't go on. My stomach is bursting. Make an effort, Salman. Try. I can't go on, he groaned. He lowered his pants and fell to the ground. That is the image I have of him. So that is a bit more like euphemism. It's like death. We are not seeing him anymore, and we could see death of indirectly it says about the death of Salman. So it is bit euphemism, not 100%, but I don't believe that he was finished off by an SS, for nobody had noticed. He must have died, trampled under the feet of thousands of men who followed us. So people might have stepped on him and trampled under the feet of thousands of men who followed us. I soon forgot him. I soon forgot him. I began to think of myself. So again, that is important. My food was aching. I shivered with every step. So I soon forgot him. That is how people are, especially when they are in a struggle like this. They just preserve themselves. It's just self-preservation because they can't think about other people. It's just self-preservation. They are trying for the survival. Everyone is trying hard for the survival of themselves. So my food was aching. I shivered with every step. Just a few more meters and it'll be over. I'll fall. A small red flame, a shot. Death enveloped me. It suffocated me. So here we could see that Elie Wiesel is actually personifying death. Personifying death, giving a human quality to death, and says that death is actually I'm just going to highlight the whole thing a little bit because that's important. So he's trying to personify death, and he says that death is enveloping him. So death envelops him. So personifies death there, personifies giving a human quality um, to death. So personifies death, and he says that death enveloped me, it suffocated me, it stuck to me like glue. So there is a simile there. I felt I could touch it. The idea of dying, of ceasing to be, began to fascinate me, to no longer exist, to no longer feel the excruciating pain of my food, to no longer feel anything, neither fatigue, no cold, nothing, to break rank, to let myself slide to the side of the road. You could see a lot of repetition, especially the phrase like to no longer. And you could see the repetition of to no longer and to. And it's mainly to show, um, to emphasize the struggle or that he is actually going on. And he is using a lot of negative connotation, like negative words like excruciating pain, no longer feel anything. So negative connotation. There are lots of negative connotating words, negative connotation, lots of negative connotating words to stress on his struggles, to stress on his uh, sufferings that he is undergoing, to stress on his sufferings. So that repetition is also used by Elie Wiesel to show on all those kinds of sufferings. My father's presence was the only one that stopped me. Again, that is another theme there. Maybe you could highlight that. He was running, maybe just that much. My father's presence was the only thing that stopped me. So it's just his presence of his father that actually stopped him to think about death. So it is, father was actually his, you could see the father son relationship there, the importance of family, father son relationship, importance of family, and that's actually motivating people, and that father is actually or motivating him to live. So motivates, family motivates. So an idea will be like family motivates people, especially when they are in struggle. So family is actually, or the thought about the family is actually motivating them to keep going, and that is the one that actually gives them hope. So the element of hope is also coming. So if you get a topic maybe about family, you could say that it is family that actually motivates people to cling on to their faith, especially in this text. So family is really important, and how hopeful they are with if they have got their families. I had no right to let myself die, and he continues with that same thing, and he says that I had no right to let myself die. What would he do without me? I was his sole support. So the thought about his father and the necessity of him supporting his father is actually motivating him to go and move forward, and that actually helps him to overcome all his sufferings. So these thoughts were going through my mind as I continued to run, not feeling my numb foot, not even realizing that I was still running, that I still owned a body, not even realizing that I was still running, that I still owned a body that galloped down the road among thousands of others. When I became conscious of myself again, I tried to slow my pace somewhat, but there was no way. These human waves were rolling forward and would have crushed me like an ant. Beautiful imagery there, and you could also see similarly towards the end, like an ant, moving like an ant. These human waves were really rolling forward. So comparing that crowd of human beings like human waves, calling them as human waves, rolling forward and would have crushed me like an ant. By now, there's another simile here. By now, I moved like a sleepwalker. So another simile there. Like an ant is a simile as well. So I sometimes closed my eyes, and it was like running while asleep. Now and then, someone kicked me violently from behind, and I would wake up. The man in back of me was screaming, "Run faster! If you don't want to move, let us pass you." But all I had to do was close my eyes to see a whole world pass before me, to dream of another life. Again, it says the road was actually endless, and again that sentence actually shows the or emphasizes the eternity, or emphasizes the long journey that they are undergoing, and that it's going to be endless. To allow oneself to be carried by the mob, to be swept away by blind fate. When the SS were tired, they were replaced, but no one replaced us. Chilled to the bone, our throats Parched, famished, out of breath, we passed on. Look at the adjectives he's using in order to show his suffering, in order to show the depth of their suffering. We were the masters of nature, the masters of the world. We had transcended everything death, fatigue, our natural needs. We were stronger than cold and hunger, stronger than the guns and the desire to die, doomed and ruthless. Nothing but numbers. We were the only men on earth. At last, the morning star appeared in the grey sky. A hesitant light began to hover on the horizon. We were exhausted. We had lost all strength, all illusion. The commandant announced that we had already covered 20 kilometers since we left. Long since we had exceeded the limits of fatigue. Our legs moved mechanically in spite of us, without us. We came to an abandoned village. Finally, they came to an abandoned village. Not a living soul, not a single bark, houses with gaping windows. A few people slipped out of the ranks, hoping to hide in some abandoned building. One more hour of marching, and at last the order to halt. As one man, we let ourselves sink into the snow. My father shook me. No, not here. Get up, a little farther down. There is a shed over there. Come. I had neither the desire nor the soul to get up, yet I obeyed. It was not really a shed, but a brick factory whose roof had fallen in. So it's mainly they have reached a brick factory, like the roof has fallen in. Its window panes were shattered, its walls covered in soot. It was not easy to get inside. Hundreds of prisoners jostled one another at the door. We finally succeeded in entering. So finally, they both succeeded in entering inside too. The snow was thick. I let myself slide to the ground. Only now did I feel the full extent of my weakness. The snow seemed to me like a very soft, very warm carpet. Again, another simile. The snow seemed to me the snow seemed to me like very warm carpet. The simile there. I fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept, a few minutes or 1 hour, when I woke up, a frigid hand was tapping my cheeks. I tried to open my eyes. It was my father. How he had changed, how he had aged since last night. I'm just underlining the whole thing. How he had aged since last night. His body was completely twisted, shriveled up into himself. His eyes were glazed over, his lips parched, decayed. Everything about him expressed total exhaustion. His voice was damp from tears and snow. We could see the concept of change, theme, change, how these kinds of inhumanity and brutality and racism is actually changing people, changing their identity. His identity is completely changed at that moment. Don't let yourself overcome by sleep, Eliezer. It's dangerous to fall asleep in snow. One falls asleep forever. Come, my son, get up. So they are trying that father-son relationship we could see towards the end of these chapters and throughout the chapters because they are supporting each other. Get up. How could I? How was I to leap this warm blanket? I was hearing my father's words, but their meaning escaped me as if he had asked me to carry the entire shed on my arms. Come, my son, come. I got up with clenched teeth. Holding on to me with one arm, he let me outside. It was not easy. It was difficult to go out as to come in. So again, you could see that a father-son relationship there, how they are caring each other. So that father-son family relationship, father-son bond, you could actually see, especially in this part. It was not easy. It was difficult to go out as to come in. Beneath our feet there lay men, crushed, trampled underfoot, dying. Nobody paid attention to them. Nobody paid attention to them. So again, the theme, you could see from now on we could see a lot theme of death a lot, and it's really hard even to read. Beneath our feet there lay men crushed, trampled underfoot. Nobody paid attention to them. So we could see the theme of death, repeated death. Theme of death is actually recurrent. And we could see when you look at that last sentence, we could see that nobody is even paying attention to them because everyone is worried only about their survival. Everyone is self-preserving and they are worried about their own survival. We were outside, the icy wind whipped my face. Again, that is another personification. We know that the wind cannot whip, so that is personification. If you want me to write, I will write it here. So that's a personification. I was constantly biting my lips so that they wouldn't freeze. All around me, what appeared to be a dance of death. Again, you could see alliteration, dance of death. All around me, what appeared to be a dance of death, alliteration, 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 dance of death. My head was reeling. I was walking through a cemetery among the stiffened corpses. There were logs of wood. Not a sound of distress, not a plaintive cry, nothing but mass agony and silence. Nobody asked anyone for help. One died because one had to. No point in making trouble. So it's all about death. The whole paragraph is about death and how people are trying to ignore the other people, and they are all looking for their own survival. What appeared to be a dance of death, and look at the imagery of that dance of death. So it's trying to personify death, and the death, it's as if the death is actually dancing because his death is happy. There are so many corpses among the stiffened corpses where they were logs of wood. I saw myself in every stiffened corpses. Again, he says that he imagined himself in every stiffened corpse. Soon I wouldn't be seeing them anymore. I would be one of them. So he started to lose hope and he started to think about death. So death is a constant reminder. Death is standing there as a constant reminder. Come, father, let us go back to the shed. He didn't answer. He was not even looking at the dead. Come, father, it's better there. You will be able to lie down. We will take turns. I will watch over you and you will watch over me. We won't let each other fall asleep. We will look after each other. Again, we could see the bond and they're supporting each other, trying to help each other. He accepted. After trampling over many bodies and corpses, we succeeded in getting inside. We let ourselves fall to the ground. Don't worry, son. Go to sleep. I'll watch over you. You first, father. Sleep. He refused. I stretched out and tried to sleep, doze a little, but in vain. God knows I would have given to be able to sleep a few moments, but deep inside I knew that to sleep meant to die because it is snowing, and if they are going to sleep, that means snow is going to fall upon them and they're going to die. And something in me rebelled against death. Again, I like that sentence. And something in me rebelled against death. I'm just going to underline that much. And something in me rebelled against that death. Death, which was settling in all around me, silently, gently. It would seize upon a sleeping person, steal into him, and devour him bit by bit. We could see again personification, as I told you before. Death is personified here. Death is personified. Death is considered as a human. Death is personified. Death is considered as a human being. Death is personified, and that's why he says that. And something in me rebelled against that death, death which was settling in all around me, silently, gently. It would seize upon a sleeping person. Can we know that death can't seize upon a sleeping person? Again, it's a kind of personification. Steal into him, devour him bit by bit. Again, all those are personification. We could see personification there, personifying death, personification, and the imagery of death, imagery of death, imagery of death. Next to me, someone was trying to awaken his neighbor, his brother perhaps, or his comrade. In vain. Defeated, he laid down. He lay down too, next to the corpse, and also fell asleep. Who would wake him up? Reaching out with my arm, I touched him. Wake up! One mustn't fall asleep here. He half opened his eyes. No advice, he said, his voice a whisper. I'm exhausted. Mind your business. Leave me alone. My father, too, was gently dozing. I couldn't see his eyes. His cap was covering his face. Wake up, I whispered in his ears. He woke with a start. He sat up, bewildered, stunned like an orphan. Again, simile. He is once he is getting up, he is stunned like an orphan. He looked all around him. Do you want me to write or write simile? He looked all around him, taking it all in as if he had suddenly decided to make an inventory of his universe to determine where he was and how and why he was there. Then he smiled. I shall always remember that smile. What world did it come from? Heavy snow continued to fall over the corpses. Again, we could see the death. We could see the constant death is there as a constant reminder. The door of the shed opened. An old man appeared. His mustache was covered with ice. His lips were blue. It was Rabbi Elayu. So I want you to remember that character, Rabbi Elayu, all who had headed in a small congregation in Poland, a very kind man, beloved man. Everyone in the camp, even the capos and the officers, loved him despite the ordeals and repudiations. His face continued to radiate his innocence. So he was such a nice guy. He was the only rabbi whom nobody ever failed to address as rabbi in Vienna. So he was a much respected person. He looked like one of the prophets of old, always in the midst of his people when they needed to be consoled. And strangely, his words never provoked anyone. They did bring peace. So here we could see the character of Rabbi Elayu, who is a very kind and nice person, liked by everyone. As he entered the shed, his eyes, brighter than ever, seemed to be searching for someone. Perhaps somewhere here has, perhaps someone somewhere here has seen my son. He had lost his son in the commotion. He had searched for him among the dying to no avail. Then he had dug through the snow to find his body in vain. So what is his problem? He is missing his, excuse me, he's missing his son. So we could see that beautiful father son bond, especially when Rabi is coming in search of his own son. He has tried everywhere. He has searched for his son everywhere, but in vain. For 3 years, they had stayed close together. Again, that is important because that actually shows the relationship of the father and the son, Rabbi Elayu and his son. So for 3 years, they had stayed close to one another, side by side. They had endured the suffering, the blows. They had waited for their ration of bread and they had prayed 3 years from camp to camp, from selection to selection. And now, when the end seemed near, fate had separated them. So we could see that beautiful father son relationship is actually breaking down there, and they are separated through the death of his son, or we don't know what happened to Rabbi Eli's son. When he came near me, Rabbi Elayu whispered, "It happened on the road." Now Rabbi is explaining what actually happened to Elisa. "We lost sight of one another during the journey. I fell behind a little at the rear of the column. I didn't have the strength to run anymore, and my son didn't notice." So that's what he says. So while they were marching, we lost sight of one another during the journey. Didn't and my son didn't notice. That's what he's trying to say. That's all I know. Where has he disappeared? Where can I find him? Perhaps you have seen him in somewhere. So that's the reason why Rabbi Elayu has come in search of his son, because they lost sight during the journey, because father was falling behind. He was behind, and he didn't have strength to run anymore, but the son didn't notice. "No, Rabbi Elayu, I haven't seen him." So Eliezer just replies, "And so he left. As he had come, a shadow swept away by the wind. He had already gone through the door when I remembered that I had noticed his son running beside me. I had forgotten and so had not mentioned it to Rabbi Elayu." So now Eliezer realizes that he has actually seen. I remember him noticing that his son running beside him. But then I remembered something else, and this is really important. His son had seen him losing the ground. His son has seen him losing ground, sliding back to the rear of the column. He had seen him, and he had continued to run in front, letting the distance between them become greater. So here we could see that father-son relationship is breaking down, or the son is trying to ignore his father, mainly for his own survival. So it's all about survival and preservation. He's not thinking about his father. Survival, self-preservation. So the son is just thinking about preserving himself. So the increasingly awful brutality actually eventually separates them, and the son has actually ignored. Rabi's son has actually deserted his weak and dying father to help himself survive. So the son has actually ignored his father, and that's what Eliezer remembers. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he wanted? What if he had wanted to be rid of his father? He had felt his father growing weaker, and believing that the end was near, had thought by this separation to free himself of a burden that could diminish in his own chance of survival. That is a very important paragraph because we could see the always Elie Wiesel always talks about the relationship between father and son in different characters with from different families. He always talks about the relationship between a father and son. So here too we are. Eliezer is actually talking to us about Rabbi Elihu and his son and what happened to them. And now a terrible thought crossed his mind, Elie Wiesel's mind. What if he had wanted to be rid of his father? Now, Eli is thinking he might have, that Rabbi Eli's son might have actually knowingly might have ignored his father because he knew that his father is going to be weak and that he's getting weaker and believes that the end was near and had thought by this separation, at least by this separation, if her father is gone, at least he could relieve himself a burden. He could free himself from the burden of that father, and that could diminish his own chance of survival. So he was actually trying to do it for his own benefit, or he might have ignored it for his own benefit. So that's what Elie Wiesel is trying to think. It was good that I had forgotten all that, and I was glad that Rabbi Elihu continued to search for his beloved son. And in spite of myself, a prayer formed inside me. Ah, that's really important, this 4 lines. And in spite of myself, a prayer formed inside me, a prayer to this God in whom I no longer believed. O God, Master of the universe, give me the strength never to do what Rabbi Eli's son has done. So, Eliezer has got a feeling that people may do like this when they are having trouble. And Eliezer has actually seen one of the younger boy doing this to his father, and now he is having a guilty feeling in his mind, and he might have thought like this several times, and he is praying to God, whom he never believes now, no longer believes, and he is praying to God to give him strength to not to be like Eliezer's son, Rabbi Elihu's son, to try not to do what Rabbi Elihu's son has done. So he's actually praying that he should never do that again, or that should never happen in his life. So the son's abandonment of his Rabbi father is actually a reminder to Eli to fight whatever impulses he might have, to view his weakening father as a burden, to remember his duty as a son, and to never abandon his father. So he's praying that, please God, please don't let me to abandon my father, just like Rabbi Eli's son has done. So even though he no longer believes in God, Eli actually prays that he doesn't do the same to his own father, because he feels that he may have a temptation to do like just like Rabbi Eli's son, and that's why he's praying. That's why he's asking strength to God to never do like Rabbi Eli's son. That is a very important scene, that one, guys. They was shouting outside in the courtyard. Night had fallen, and the SS were ordering us ordering us to form ranks. And night had fallen again. Night, as I told you, night is a constant metaphor. It's always there to show the uncertainty and the darkness in their life. We started to march once more. The dead remained in the yard, under the snow without even a marker. Like fallen gods, no one recited Kaddish over them. Sons abandoned the remains of their fathers without a tear. Again, we could see death, the theme of death, and the relationship of father-son breaking down. Sons are abandoning their own remains of their fathers without even a tear. On the road, it snowed endlessly. And repetition of that snowed 3 times. It snowed and snowed and it snowed endlessly to show the depth of their suffering. Repetition is used. We were marching slowly. Even the guards seemed tired. My wounded foot no longer hurt, probably frozen. I felt I had lost that food. I felt I had lost that food. Again, it's a metaphor. I felt I had lost that food. Metaphor. It had become detached from me like a wheel fallen off from a car. Again, another simile there. Another simile. Detached like a wheel. Never mind, I had to accept the fact I would have to leave with only one leg. The important thing was not to dwell on it, especially now. Leave those thoughts for later. Our column had lost all appearance of discipline. Everyone walked as he wished, as he could. No more gunshots. Our guards surely were tired. But death hardly needed their help. So even though the guards were not shooting them, still the death doesn't need their help. The cold was conscientiously doing its work. At every step, somebody fell down and ceased to suffer. So at every time someone is dying. So here too, but death hardly needed their help. Here too, Elie Wiesel is trying to personify death. He personifies death like a person and says that death hardly needed the help of the SS officer, even without the shootings or the gunshots of the SS officers and the guards. The nature itself, the cold weather, is actually taking the life of many, many people. So personifying death. From time to time, SS officers on motorcycles drove the length of the column to shake off the growing apathy. Hold on, we are almost there. Courage. Just a few more hours. We are arriving in Gleiwitz. I hope that's how it's pronounced, Gleiwitz. These words of encouragement, even coming as they did from the mouths of our assassins, were of great help. Nobody wanted to give up now, just before the end, so close to our destination. Our eyes searched the horizon of the barbed wire of Gleiwitz. They were looking for the barbed wire of Gleiwitz. When I heard the word barbed wire, I don't know how your book cover is. By my front cover, Knight's front cover is all about barbed wire. It's an image of a barbed wire, and you could see the snowflakes on that barbed wire. So that actually shows the brutality and all those that they had to endure while they were in camp and while they were marching. By now it was night, again night, the theme of night or the word night is actually repeating there again and again. I'm not able to highlight, I don't know why. It had stopped snowing. We marched a few more hours before we arrived. We saw the camp only when we stood right in front of its gate. In front of its gate. So they arrived in a prison camp, another new prison camp in Gleiwitz. Next page, the capos quickly settled us into the barrack. They was showing and jostling as if they were the ultimate haven, the gateway to life. People trod over numbed bodies, trampled, wounded faces. So there were no cries, only a few moans. My father and I were thrown to the ground by this rolling tide. From beneath there came a desperate cry. So both Elie Wiesel and his father, both of them were thrown to the ground by the people pushing them, or thrown to the ground by the rolling tide of people. From beneath came a desperate cry, "You are crushing me, have mercy." That was a sound. And Elie Wiesel thinks that that is a very familiar voice. "You are crushing me, mercy, have mercy." The same faint voice, the same cry I had heard somewhere before. This voice has spoken to me one day, when, years ago. No, it must have been in the camp. Again he heard the voice, "Mercy." Knowing that I was crushing him, preventing him from breathing, I wanted to get up and disengage myself to allow him to breathe, but I myself was crushed under the weight of other bodies. I had difficulty breathing. I dug my nails into unknown faces. I was biting my way through searching for air. No one cried out. So again, you could see the sufferings that they are undergoing, and they are actually struggling even to get a little bit of air. Suddenly, I remembered that was actually the sound of Juliet. It was actually Juliet. You remembering Juliet? Juliet, the boy from Warsaw, who was a violinist, who played violinist in the Buna Orchestra. Juliet, is that you? Eliezer, the 25 whiplashes. Yes, I remember. He fell silent. A long moment went by. Juliet, can you hear me, Juliet? Yes, he said feebly. What do you want? He was not dead. Are you all right, Juliet? I asked, less to know his answer than to hear him speak, to know he was alive. All right, Eliezer, all right, Eliezer. Not too much air, tired, my feet are swollen. It's good to rest, but my violin. So we could see that he's still thinking about his violin, because violin is for him like a soul. I thought he had lost his mind. His violin, here. What about your violin? He was gasping. I am afraid they will break my violin. I brought it with me. Again, ellipses, the use of ellipses. You could see many times Elie Wiesel is using ellipses when to show, especially to emphasize the uncertainty of many things. Many times there are lots of uncertainty in their life, and to show that uncertainty, he is actually using that three dots of ellipse. ellipses. They couldn't complete. It's all uncertainty. I could not answer him. Someone had lain down on top of me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe through my mouth or my nose. Sweat was running down my forehead and my back. This was it, the end of the road, a silent death, suffocation, no way to scream to call for help. So they are still thinking, or Elie Wiesel is actually thinking that this is the end of his life because he is not even getting any proper breath. I tried to rid myself of my invisible assassin. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched. I'm going to underline the whole paragraph. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched. I fought for a breath of air. I tore at decaying flesh that did not respond. I could not free myself of that mess weighing down my chest. Who knows, was I struggling with a dead man? So here we could see the act of survival. He's struggling his best, he's trying his best to survive, to self-preserve, self-preservation. So the theme of self-preservation and survival. I shall never know. All I can say is that I prevailed. I succeeded in digging a hole in that wall of dead and dying people, a small hole through which I could drink a little air. I could drink a little air. That's a personification. Personification. I could drink a little air. And digging the hole in that wall of dead and dying people. There were so many people, and not to show the massive amount of people who have been dead. He is actually showing this, giving the imagery of digging a hole in the wall of dead and dying people. And again, I could drink a little air, personification. Father, are you there? I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew that he could not be far from me. Yes, a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. I am trying to sleep. He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one's guard even for a moment when death could strike at any time? Again, personifying death. Death could strike at any time. Personifying death personifies death. Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living. Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? Or was it a hallucination? It had to be Juliet. He was playing a fragment of Beethoven concerto. Never before had I heard such beautiful sound in such silence. How had he succeeded in disengaging himself to slip from under my body without my feeling it? The darkness enveloped us. Again, darkness is also personified, personification, personification. The darkness enveloped us. All I could hear was the violin, and it was as if Juliet's soul had become his bow. It was as if, sorry, it was as if Juliet's soul had become his bow. Another simile, as if his soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings. His unfulfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which he could never play again. So hopelessness. You could see the theme of hopelessness there. I shall never forget Juliet. How could I forget this concert given before an audience of the dead and dying? Even today, when I hear that particular piece of Beethoven, my eyes close, and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade, bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I woke, at daybreak, I saw Juliet facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse. So we could see the death of Juliet. Death. We stayed in Gleivich for 3 days, days without food or water. We were forbidden to leave the barrack. The door was guarded by the SS. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and disheveled to judge by what the others looked like. The bread we had brought from Buna had been devoured long since. I'm skipping some. On the third day at dawn, we were driven out of the barrack. We threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. like prayer shows again, simile there. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp into two. A group of SS officers stood waiting. A word flew through our ranks, selection. So there too they had to face selection in this new prison camp too. They had to face selection. The SS officers were doing the selection. The weak to the left, those who walked well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him, and an SS shouted at my back. I inched my back through the crowd. Several SS men rushed to find me, creating such confusion that a number of people were able to switch over to the right, among them my father and I. So Elie Wiesel is actually taking another risk in trying to save his father, and finally they became together. They somehow, because of that confusion, they were able to be together. We were led out of the camp after a half-hour march. Um, we were arrived in the very middle of a field crossed by railroad tracks. This was where we have to wait. This was where we were to wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily. We were forbidden to sit down or to move. A thick layer of snow was accumulating on our blankets. We were given bread, the usual ration. We throw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of quenching his thirst by eating snow. Soon we were all imitating him. As we were not permitted to bend down, we took out our spoons and ate that snow off our neighbors' backs. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were greatly amused by the spectacle. The hours went by. Our eyes were tired from staring at the horizon, waiting for the liberating train to appear. It arrived only very late that evening, an infinitely long train, composed of roofless cattle cars. The SS shoved us inside a 100-bed car. We were so skinny when everybody was on board. The convoy left. So we could see the change that again when they say they are trying to pack almost 100 people. They were so skinny, so that's why they are trying to pack almost 100 people into a long train. And that is actually a reflection of how emaciated they now are. What do you mean by emaciated? How thin they are. So it's actually a reflection. It's actually a reflection of how emaciated, how emaciated they now are. How emaciated they now are, as well as the increasingly brutal treatment of Nazis. So we could also see the increasingly brutal treatment of the Nazis there. I'm just moving into chapter 7 as well because it's a short one. So I'm going to write chapter 7 there. That is chapter 7. Pressed tightly against one another in an effort to resist the cold, our heads empty and heavy, our brains a whirlwind of decaying memories. So we could see actually a rule of three there, our heads empty, heavy, our brains a whirlwind of decaying memories in an effort to resist the cold. So we could see it's a kind of use of several words or a rule of three, our minds numb with indifference. Here or elsewhere, what did it matter? Die today or tomorrow or later. The night was growing longer, never ending. Again, that is also really important. The night, as I told you, the night repeats many times. Right, night is a metaphor. It serves as a literal. Night serves as literal and a symbolic time of literal and symbolic time of despair. So it's not just a literal meaning. It's not just that the night is growing long. It's not just literal. It is symbolic as well. It's a symbolic time of despair, and that's why it says the night was growing longer, never ending. When at last a greyish light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk deeply between the shoulders, crouching, piled one on top of the other, like a cemetery covered with snow. Again, like a cemetery covered with snow. There is a simile there. I'm skipping some. My father had huddled near me, draped in his blanket, shoulders laden with snow, and what if he were dead as well? I called out to him, no response. I would have screamed if I could have. He was not moving. Suddenly, the evidence overwhelmed me. There was no longer any reason to live, any reason to fight. The train stopped in an empty field. The abrupt halt had wakened a few sleepers. They stood looking around, startled. Outside, the SS walked by, shouting, throw out all the dead, outside all the corpse. So we could actually see the inhumanity and brutality when they actually says that throw out all the dead and all corpse. So inhumanity, dehumanization, or inhumanity or brutality. The living, the living were glad they would have more room. Again, when it says, I'm going to use a different color scheme. The living were glad they would have more room. Again, that's all about survival. They just think about their own survival and their own preservation. So survival is the concept there. Volunteers began the task. They touched those who had remained on the ground. Here is one, take him. The volunteers undressed him and eagerly shared his garments. Another one about survival. So the volunteers undressed him and shared his garments. So again, it's a concept of survival. They are using that garment of the dead person for their own survival and for preserving themselves. Then two grave diggers grabbed him like the head and feet and threw him from the wagon like a sack of flour. Again, another simile there, like a sack of flour. So you could write simile. They were shouting all around. Come on, here is another, my neighbor. He's not moving. I woke from my apathy only when two men approached my father. I threw myself on his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, Father, Father, wake up. They're going to throw you outside. His body remained inert. The two grave diggers had grabbed me by the neck. Leave him alone. Can't you see that he's dead? No, I yelled. He's not dead, not yet. And I started to hit him harder and harder. At last, my father half opened his eyes. They were glassy. He was breathing faintly. You see, I cried. The two men went away. 20 corpses were thrown from our wagon. Then the train resumed its journey, leaving in its wake, in a snowy field in Poland, hundreds of naked orphans without a tomb. We could see the theme of death repeating there. It's all about death. And we could also see the father-son relationship, the father-son bond, how the father is taking care of his son. We received no food. We lived on snow. It took the place of bread. The days resembled the nights, and the nights left in our souls the dregs of their darkness. So that train trip is actually seeming to last an eternity. It took the place of the bread, and there is a good quote that the days resemble the nights, and the nights left in our souls the dregs of their darkness. The train rolled slowly, often halted for a few hours and continued. It never stopped snowing. We remained lying on the floor for days and nights, one on top of the other, never uttering a word. We were nothing but frozen bodies. We were nothing but frozen bodies, our eyes closed. We merely waited for the next stop to unload our dead. Again, it's all about death and self preservation. So, if they are unloading the dead people, at least they will have more room. That's just that is just the thought of the prisoners. They followed days and nights of traveling. Occasionally we would pass through the German towns, usually very early in the morning. German laborers were going to work. They would stop and look at us with surprise. One day we had come to a stop and a worker took a piece. I'm just highlighting that bit. A worker took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought desperately over a few crumbs. So we could see the inhumanity and the treatment of human beings like animals, animalization of human beings. Years later, so this is like something that has happened years later, and he's trying to put it there to give us an understanding of how the situation was at that time. Years later, I witnessed a similar spectacle in Aden. Our ship's passengers amused themselves by throwing coins to the natives who dove to retrieve them. An elegant Parisian lady took great pleasure in this game. When I noticed two children desperately fighting in the water, one trying to strangle the other, I implored the lady, please don't throw any more coins. Why not? He said, I like to give charity. So here, Elie Wiesel is trying to make the audience understand the situation that was actually at that time. When if someone is trying to do a charity in such kind of a situation, people are actually fighting, and they are because they are starving and they are behaving like animals. So just to show the importance of that Inhumanity and dehumanization. Eliezer is just quoting something that he has actually seen years later in some other place. In the wagon where the bread had landed, a battle had ensued. Men were hurling themselves against each other, trampling, tearing at and mauling each other. Beasts of prey unleashed, animal hate in their eyes, and extraordinary vitality possessed them, sharpening their teeth and nails. So I basically want you to underline that two sentences because it's all about animalization of humans. Animalization of human beings or humans. The prisoners have actually lost their humanity and they are all thinking about their own survival, and that's why they are fighting each other. A crowd of workmen and curious passerby had formed all along the train. They had undoubtedly never seen a train with this kind of cargo. Soon pieces of bread were falling into the wagon from all sides, and the spectators observed these emaciated creatures ready to kill for a crust of bread. Again, please underline that. Again, that actually shows the animalistic nature or the animalistic behavior of people. And the spectators observed these emaciated creatures ready to kill for a crust of bread, just like animals. A piece fell into a wagon. I decided not to move. Anyway, I knew that I would not be strong enough to fight off dozens of violent men. I saw not far from me an old man dragging himself on all fours. I think you have a similar kind of imagery. We had a similar kind of imagery like before, um, in the scene where a man is dragging towards a cauldron of soup, big cauldron of soup. Same way, this old man dragging himself on all fours. He had just detached himself from the struggling mob. He was holding one hand to his heart. Again, he was holding one hand to his heart. Elie Wiesel is actually using an alliteration to emphasize that particular concept. Alliteration. He's using alliteration. He was holding one hand to his heart. At first, I thought he had received a blow to his chest. Then I understood he was hiding a piece of bread under his shirt. With lightning speed, he pulled it out and put it to his mouth. His eyes lit up, smile like a grimace illuminated his ashen face, and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had lain down beside him, and this shadow threw itself over him. Stunned by the blows, the old man was crying. That is a very emotional scene there. A shadow had lain down beside him, so he could actually see someone. Someone has actually on top of him. Stunned by the blows, the old man was actually crying, and he was crying, calling out, "May, my little May, don't you recognize me? You are killing your father. I have bread for you too, for you too." And again, Elie Wiesel is using that ellipsis to show the to emphasize that particular situation, that very emotional scene. And the father actually has been bringing bread for him and his son, but his son would turn against his own father just for the food. So in human nature or animalization of humans, and we could also say that this happens because of their own necessity of survival and preserving themselves rather than helping others. So that is a scene that we could see here, and you could write the theme dehumanization or brutality, and we could see the death. We are actually witnessing the death of the father by the hands of the son. He collapsed, but his fist was still clutching a small crust he wanted to raise to his mouth, but the other threw himself on him. The old man mumbled something, groaned, and died. So death of that father. Nobody cared. His son searched him, took the crust of bread, and began to devour it. He didn't get far. Two men had been watching him. They jumped him, others joined. When they withdrew, there were two dead bodies next to me, the father and the son. So we are actually witnessing, or Elie Wiesel, who is only 16, is actually witnessing to the death of a father and a son, and both of them have died fighting each other just for food or just for their own survival. In our wagon, there was a friend of my father's, another character we are meeting, male cats. He had worked as a gardener in Buna and from time to time had brought us some green vegetables. Less undernourished than rest of us, detention had been easier on him because he was stronger than most of us. He had been put in charge of our wagon. On the third night of our journey, I woke up with a start when I felt two hands on my throat trying to strangle me. I barely had time to call out father. So we are witnessing the scene where someone is trying to strangle Elie Wiesel. Just that one word, I was suffocating, but my father had awakened and grabbed my aggressor. Too weak to overwhelm him, he thought of calling help from meerkats. Come quickly, someone is strangling my son. Again, we could see the father-son relationship there. Even the father is actually trying. So you could see the contrast of the father-son that happened just before, and we could see Elie Wiesel and his father's bond and relationship here, which is contrary to the other one. Come quickly, someone is strangling my son. In a few moments I was freed. I never did find out why the stranger had wanted to strangle me, but days later, Meerkat told my father, Shlomo, I'm getting weak. My strength is gone. I won't make it. So, hopelessness. Meerkat was a person who was trying to help everyone, but at this, he was a strong person, but he couldn't move on. He couldn't hold on anymore. And he says that he's getting weak and that his strength has gone, and he says that I can't make it. Don't give in. My father tried to encourage him. You must resist. Don't lose faith in yourself. Again, Father Shlomo is trying to give hope. But Maycats had only groaned in response. I can't go on, Shlomo. I can't help it. I can't go on. And even he couldn't complete that sentence. And that's why Elie Wiesel is using ellipses there. My father took his arm, and Maycats, the strong one, the sturdiest of us all, began to cry. His son had taken. I want you to underline that whole paragraph. His son had taken from him during the first selection, but only now was he crying for him. Only now he did fall apart. He could not go on. He had reached the end. So, what happens in situations like this is most of them, in trying to stay alive, the prisoners, for the most part, they don't seem to allow themselves to grieve. They don't have even time to cry or grieve. But at moments like this, at the limit of his physical endurance, Mayer at last actually begins to grieve for his son. He gives up on life and he's actually letting death come for him because of his lost relationship with, or because of his son's absence. He couldn't even hold on. So we could see that it's family that is making people to hold on and to move and to overcome all their struggles. So importance of family we could see throughout these scenes. On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind began to blow, and the snow kept falling. I'm skipping some. Somebody got up and yelled, we must not remain sitting. We shall freeze to death. Let's get up and move. So everyone is trying to help each other. We all got up. We all pulled our soft blankets tight around our shoulders, and we tried to take a few steps to shuffle back and forth in place. Suddenly, a cry rose in the wagon, the cry of a wounded animal. Someone has just died. Again, animal imagery there. Cry of a wounded animal imagery. Others, close to death, imitated his cry, and their cries seemed to come from beyond the grave. Soon everybody was crying, groaning, mourning, cries of distress hurled into the wind and the snow. The lament spread from wagon to wagon. It was contagious, and now hundreds of cries rose at once, the death rattle of an entire convoy with the end approaching. All boundaries had been crossed. Nobody had any strength left, and the night seemed endless. Again, underline the phrase, underline the word night. The night seemed endless. Meerkats was mourning. Why don't they just shoot us now? That same night we reached our destination. It was late. The guards came to unload us. The dead were left in the wagons. Only those who could stand could leave. Meerkats remained on the train. Again, look at that sentence. Elie Wiesel is using euphemistic language. He's not saying that Meerkats has died, but just says that Meerkats remained on the train. So using euphemistic language. And he's using a lot of euphemism in order to show death. He's using a lot of euphemistic language. So the dead were left in the wagons. Only those who could stand could leave. Meerkats remained on the train. The last day had been the most lethal. We had been 100 or so in this wagon. 12 of us left it, among them my father and myself. We had arrived in Buchenwald. Finally, they arrived. Both Elie Wiesel and his father was out of those 12 who survived among the 100, and he was lucky to have his father together with him. And they have reached the camp Buchenwald towards the end of that chapter.